All right. I'm here with Dr. Bryan Rill, the principal at Rill Insights. He is a man I call the product scientist because he brings an incredible amount of rigor to research and product operations. A guy that I've worked with, I've brought into several projects with clients that I've worked on, and he's just done some incredible results to help them gain insight into their customers and to build really great product experiences. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Bryan.
Thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm glad we finally got to get you on the show. We've obviously been working together for a long time. We've done a bunch of workshops together for the Chaos to Clarity Accelerator program. And I really wanted to bring you on and kind of look back at the work that we've done together, and the challenges that we've helped our mutual clients overcome, and really help our audience understand the value of product discovery and of good, strong UX research. But so why don't you start by just kind of giving me a little bit about your colorful background, and what got you into product research and development?
That's a long story, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I think I'm like many others that found themselves in UX from very different pathways in life.
Mhm.
So originally, I was a cultural anthropologist. That's what I got my PhD in. And believe it or not, I went off and did my research studying and training with monks in the mountains of Japan. Um, so, so from there to UX is quite a long story, but I'll make it short. After I graduated my PhD, it was right after the 2008 crash. And so there were really no jobs in anthropology academics here in America. And I got this job offer at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, which is one of the top design schools in Asia. And I took it, not knowing what was going to happen. And I was fairly convinced that they were going to laugh me off the campus within a week because, I hadn't really designed anything. So I get there and, I'm co-teaching with the guy who built the Motorola Razr and like one of the mini engineers and things like this. And I'm horribly intimidated. But it turned out to be a really great experience because once people started asking me what I did, and I said, I study people. And really that's what anthropology brings to the table is the methodology that we use in design all the time just to understand people. I didn't have a free lunch for the next 3 years after that. They were always pulling me aside and saying, well, how do I do this? How do I do this? And so I ended up building a curriculum around how to do design research at PolyU. And I carry that with me to this day. I still teach it at UCSD and at the New School here in San Diego. But it really showed me the value that research has in design. And that has really been the foundation for everything that I've built since.
Yeah, we obviously talk a lot about human-centered design, and I think that's it's a phrase, a buzzword that I think a lot of people maybe misconstrue or misunderstand. What does that mean to you?
To me, it's very simple and it's not a buzzword. It means building things by engaging the people you want to build them for,
Mhm.
from the very beginning all the way through and then afterwards. So human-centered design simply means instead of building something because there's a new technology and then hiring a marketing firm to go out there and promote whatever you build, start by observing and understanding people, right? Try to figure out what their problems are, where you could improve the way that they're doing something in their life, or maybe how to create an opportunity that doesn't even exist in the world yet. And then from that place of knowledge about people and their needs, then you build the right thing that fits those needs. That to me is human-centered design, and the rest of the stuff is just processes that complement that philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you help your clients? How do you come in and bring that discipline?
Well, I think there's two major scenarios I hear a lot. And one is, I don't know if I'm building the right thing. And the answer to that for me is discovery, right? This is where you go out and you do that fundamental research to understand who people are, what their needs are, and what their opportunity is. You can also do a lot of understanding of the market and competition in this phase. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is when people have a product and they say, well, my product isn't performing as well as I'd like it to. Maybe engagement's low, retention's low, churn is high, one of these things that's a business metric. And I ask them, why do you think that is? And they don't really know. And so the answer to that problem is UX research, right? So evaluative research that looks at the product, benchmarks its performance, and then can drive recommendations based upon what actual customers say as to how to improve it. So those are the big scenarios where I think human-centered design methods appear in my consulting work. But of
Mhm.
course, I'm teaching this to young and future designers and product managers at universities. And my idea is you should be building things this way from the start, right?
Mhm.
You shouldn't wait until you have a problem to implement human-centered design. If you do it from the beginning, you're probably going to circumvent many of those problems in the first place. So to
Mhm.
me, that then translates into, well, how do we structure the way we do things so that we are leveraging this approach and the techniques that come from it?
It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually having a conversation with the great Don Norman last night,
Oh, nice.
and he's promoting his new book. And for anyone who doesn't know, Don Norman wrote The Design of Everyday Things. It's a seminal book for anyone who is designing anything or even cares about how things are made or designed in their lives. And I was talking with him about the work that I do and that we've actually done together. And he had the same exact response that this is something that really needs to be innate in designers. It's something that they need to kind of, start with that foundation. It's really hard to retrofit after the fact. But suffice it to say, yeah, you're doing the right work there. You're sort of forming and shaping the next generation. But okay, so there are people out there, obviously, founders and whatnot, who aren't designers and who aren't anthropologists. And so, how can you come in and help them establish that foundation so that they can again build the right thing and build more better performing products?
That's I wish there was a vanilla answer to that. Like, hey, we're
Yeah.
just going to come in and teach you guys design thinking. And I think many people are aware that that approach has been tried for the last decade or so, with some successes and more failures.
Mm.
It's not a blanket approach that you can come into an organization. You really need to understand what the size of their team is, what challenges they're facing at the moment, what systems they already have in place. Because every organization has a whole bunch of smart people working for it.
Hmm.
Right. So it's about taking that collective intelligence that's already there and then building things to support it. So if it's a startup, for example, they don't need complicated systems. They just need information. Right. So
Hmm.
it might be coming in and doing some of the discovery work for them and then showing them how to actually go out and kind of lead by example to conduct that research and then use that to inform their decisions by linking the insights that they gain from research to their product requirement documentation, for example. And that may be all that they need, especially if they're in that phase of, I'm not sure if I'm building the right thing.
Hmm.
If it's another company, let's say, again, startup scenario that has a product out there and it's not performing well, it might not be discovery research they need. It might be that they need a continuous discovery system, which is setting up listening posts where you can continuously collect customer feedback and again drive that to the decision makers, which are typically the product managers on the team.
Hmm.
Um, so those are a couple pieces. But then beyond systems design, one of the things I've really learned in the last year working with a couple organizations doing this is that it's more than about theories and processes and building systems. It's about helping people learn how to use them.
Hmm.
And that is a whole different level of effort. And it takes a lot of patience on everybody's part. It takes an understanding about change management and not trying to do too much all at once. And really, I think their leadership is key because the leadership needs to understand the implications of culture change and process change and give people the bandwidth to do it,
Hmm.
um, as well as encourage it. And when you have when you have good process, when you have good leadership, when you got good culture building and training, you can really transform how an organization works and makes it much more successful.
Yeah, I've said this to you many times over the years, and I obviously you've grown and evolved a lot in this way, but a fear of mine is always, or the resistance that a lot of founders may have is, well, this research is some academic endeavor. I just want to build stuff. I just want to get results. So what have been your tactics to convey the value of this work as a real practical product, system or function, as opposed to again, a kind of a nice to have navel gazing exercise.
That's a great question. And I think that's the number one question that researchers face. Like, what is the
Yeah.
ROI of research? Prove it, right? And in the early days, I used to pull together these very, evocative pitch decks with lots of industry stats that showed, not just research, but the overall idea of UX design. And there are fantastic studies by Forrester and by Gartner and other companies that show there's a 400 to 600% return on investment. But that's kind of telling people the value of research. And while I have plenty of evidence to back it up, I have a different approach now that I prefer, which is simply one question. What's the risk of getting it wrong?
Mm.
Like, if you have an idea, great. Maybe you are one of those solo geniuses that comes out there and has this fantastic idea and you bring it to market and you make millions and you convince a bunch of other people in the tech industry that this is possible and they all follow through and 90% of them fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know the great stories, right? Everybody looks at people like Steve Jobs, but if you study what Apple did and Steve Jobs did, like he fought against the iPhone, right? They had to convince him, right, of that. So is the myth true? The answer is most of the time no, or just partially. And I think a more realistic approach is just say, okay, I know I'm taking a risk here, and you have to balance between having enough time to actually do proper discovery and validation to make sure that, to gain that confidence and clarity that you are building the right thing. And of course, budgets, timelines, investors, and saying, oh, we need to get this thing to market quick. And that's a tough balance to strike. I don't always have the answer. But I think when you ask people to put a number on the value of getting it wrong, it makes them start thinking. And whatever that number is, it's way higher than what the cost of the research is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned Steve Jobs, because this was this almost comical thing that would happen to me as I used to give a lot of conference talks to startup founders and the tech community around human-centered design, or we called it user-centered design, several years ago. And, I'd be given the same talk pretty much about just how important it is to build the right things and how risky it is to build the wrong thing, or even to build the right thing the wrong way, in a way that doesn't actually solve the problem or that your customers don't actually resonate with. And invariably we get to the Q&A, and every single time someone would raise their hand, some founder who thought they were a hotshot and said, yeah, but what about Steve Jobs? Did Steve Jobs ask his customers what they wanted? And this happened so often that I actually had a backup slide that I would bring up with real quotes from Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was actually a huge proponent of human-centered design. And my favorite quote of his was something along the lines of, I'll paraphrase, get so close to your customers that you can anticipate what they want before they realize it themselves, right? So it's not about telling people what they want. It's not about coming up with an idea, divine intervention and going off and building it and expecting people to buy it. It's doing so much research and getting so inside the minds of your customer that you can see the problems, you can see potential solutions, and again, anticipate their needs. That means just being one step ahead of them. That doesn't mean being totally off in la la land. So that was always one thing that sparked some really good discussion. But to your point, exactly, I think most people see Steve Jobs as this, almost godlike figure who just came up with something like the iPhone, and oh my gosh, it was just there and it changed the world. But the reality is there was so many years of turmoil and competition and whatnot inside the company until that thing finally came out. And then obviously he was the showman, and it looked like in retrospect that, that was always the way it was going to be. Of course, ignoring the fact that there have been several different iterations of smartphones and PDAs and so on and so forth before that, that validated that was actually something that people wanted. But anyway, still a challenge to this day, I think, to convince people, that the value's there. But you make a good point also that, what is the cost of getting it wrong? And it's everything. Because what we're talking about here, really, what product discovery and research does is it creates product market fit, right? It ensures that the solution that we're building is perfectly, addressing the problem and takes them to those desired outcomes, right? That you're building something bespoke for a customer, for a problem, that you're meeting all the needs, that you're keeping in mind, principles and considerations that they may have, and building the right thing and building it the right way. So in terms of performing, actually, I liked what you mentioned. You talked about listening posts.
Yep.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So really one of the other 4 areas that we help companies transform is around this question of, I don't know if my customers are happy, or I just
Mhm.
don't understand my customer's experience, right? The problem is that there is not communication with those customers or end users. So a listening post is simply a tool that you set up in some kind of environment to continuously listen to your customers. A few obvious examples are that feedback button that's on most websites, right? To be able to give feedback anytime is what we call passive listening posts. Another effort is setting up a system where people on your product team are talking to customers, just, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them a month is all it takes. And if you have a product team where all your product managers are talking to customers, you have a tremendous amount of information coming into your organization through that.
Mhm.
And then there are survey tools, right? So you could have pop-ups that invite people to give feedback or rate their experience with follow-up comments. All of these to me are listening posts. And the idea is you're just collecting. You are listening like radar dishes,
Mhm.
what's going on, what's going on, what's going on all the time.
Mhm.
And the idea and the challenge, though, is a lot of organizations are like, yeah, that's great. Let's set up a customer experience or a CX program. And then they do it. And then they go, oh my God, the consequences of this. How do we handle that information?
Mm.
Or like, how do I even, from a software and architecture perspective, get stuff from one listening post to the product team? Right. And that's a little bit complicated, but it's about integration of tools and workflow design and stuff like that. Um, Others are like, well, we have a ton of stuff coming in from sales, and sales now is driving product development. Okay, so our customers or our prospects need feature X, Y, and Z for them to re-sign or for them to sign in the first place. This is a mistake because that's reactionary culture. You are not strategizing anything new when all you're doing is just listening to customer demands.
Mm.
And at least in my school of thought around product management, you should be forward thinking. So you should also be proactive, which
Mhm.
means not just listening to the things that are coming from sales, but doing that continuous discovery, talking to the customers all the time about what they think about current things that you have released or you're about to release, and thinking, well, what's the next best thing that is going to change the way people have an experience, that is going to make me a market leader? Because it's not just what people are used to from some previous experience and they're saying, oh, I want it out of your product as well. But it's like,
Mhm.
let's, to the point you made earlier about Steve Jobs, let's understand these people so well that we can anticipate what they need in the future.
Mhm.
And then when we build that, how strong of a market share are you going to have? Right. So CX programs are vital. And again, there's tons and tons of studies that have come out in the last few years that show that it absolutely is transformative for the success of organizations.
So yeah, I've never heard of this term listening post before, but obviously I've done it in the past, just didn't have the name for it. The way I like to think about it is the way most companies that do research that do it the wrong way, they think about it like, oh, let's go do a campaign, right? It's like this one-time effort of let's go and get some feedback, and then let's go back and understand, okay, what did we learn, and then let's use that information going forward. But that's like a snapshot in time. And so
Mhm.
while it's valuable, that information gets outdated. And so by creating these listening posts, we get a constant signal at the same point in the journey, right? And that signal will change over time. And so one thing I like to do is to say like, every, let's say on onboarding or every significant workflow to have some sort of feedback form or in-app feedback survey or an email survey that asks for their feedback. And so that even as the demographics of the customers change, or as the product itself, the product experience changes, you're able to measure, okay, what was the experience at this point compared to the way things were in the past. So then if
Mhm.
we make changes, we can go back and say, oh, look, did we improve the satisfaction at this point or for this feature compared to the past, as opposed to, again, this high effort, high lift campaign of getting research, which ends up basically, again, being thrown away because it's not in context or it's not relevant anymore.
Not only that, but it's less effective when you look at rates of response.
Hmm.
So the traditional method is like, let's send out an NPS survey, which measures the relationship a person has with a company. And I'm going to send this out once or twice a year through an email distribution. And you're
Hmm.
lucky if you get a 4 or 5% response rate. That's a benchmark in the tech industry, really. Compare that to the in-app experience, which doesn't make you go anywhere. And there's a little pop-up that says, hey, we noticed you completed your onboarding. or, you've been with us for a year. We really want to know how you feel about your experience and what we can improve. Great. Will you give us 2 minutes of your feedback? And they can say yes or no. So if they say no, it just dismisses and goes away. And it might pop up 60 days later, whatever interval you set. But if they
Mhm.
say yes, it just pops up a form right over top of their screen where they can put their feedback in right then and there and then send it away. And it doesn't disrupt their experience. The response rates on this are 20 to 30%.
Wow.
So it's a massive difference just in how you deliver that invitation to engage, because every one of
Mhm.
us gets too many emails, right?
Mhm.
Like, you really have to be good to get people's attention with an email. But if I'm just working in a system and it asks me to give feedback, I have no problem with that. And
Mhm.
it's just, and so setting up, and that's what I mean by listening posts is there's all these timing rules around how they're delivered. But you are just gathering those little bites here and there, and you're aggregating that into another location. The one caveat I would say that's really difficult, and I think every organization kind of has to face this independently, is how often are we going to
Mhm.
ask people for feedback? So, to your point in the beginning, you do something like a customer journey map, you identify what are the key milestones or touch points or moments that matter in a customer's experience, right? And then I'm going to measure something at each one of those major moments. At the same time, you don't want to bug people all the time because
Mhm.
they're quickly going to get disinterested in responding. So there's a balance that has to be struck between how many of these listening posts you can set up, the frequency in which you're inviting people to give feedback. And that's a little bit of a trial and error process. Sometimes people start small and just add like one program at a time. And that's kind of my advice, that way, when you get to that point of bothering people, they'll let you know and you're like, okay, let's stop and pull back one.
Mhm.
Or you can do a bunch, and the ones that don't get the responses are the ones that you need to pull back. But as long as you have a couple listening posts where you are hearing that voice of the customer come to you and you're driving that to the product team, you are practicing human-centered design.
So you mentioned a few key you mentioned a few key things that you work on, right? Or a few different transformations. So you said one was build the right thing, one was product performance. What else do you do?
Well, I would say, again, the first two that I come with is help build what people want, which is build the right thing. And that's the discovery efforts typically and the validation of the market and concepts. Then there is design better products, right? Which is improving the user experience with those. The third is what we just talked about. So helping companies connect with their customers. So building customer experience or experience management programs, depending on what word you want to use. And then the final area where we really help is building research and product operations. So coming in and kind of co-creating in really a very collaborative environment with leadership and executives, what the system should be, understanding the culture and what the adoption might look like,
Mhm.
actually implementing those systems, and then doing the training and follow-up support to really enable the teams to master those systems. It's very much a teach a man how to fish rather
Mhm.
than give a man a fish model. I like to work with companies. I love building systems. It might be my favorite thing to do these days. Uh, and I am an educator, so I love coming up with new ways to help people learn new skills and systems. But my favorite thing is when the light bulb goes off and they go,
Mhm.
"Bing! Oh my God,
Yeah.
this is working." I just had my first argument with an executive where I had evidence to say why we should do this instead of that, right?
Yeah.
And they get
Yeah.
super excited. And to me, that's success, right? That means that we did it, it's working. Or when an executive comes and says, man, that dashboard's amazing. I was able to just go to one place and see everything I needed to see in order to figure out what we're doing for the next 6 months on our roadmap,
Mhm.
right? And so they
Mhm.
don't have to dig into the trenches of like all the little nitty gritty details that the researchers and the PMs are doing. They have a place, a centralized home where they can just come and consume the outputs of that work.
Mhm.
And that makes a big difference. And I've worked in, huge corporations that don't have that, and it's a real challenge.
So a couple really insightful points there that also bring me some PTSD in my career. So actually, I'm an engineer by background, and I was a CTO. And what actually got me into human centered design was exactly that problem that you mentioned of an executive, a CEO, my boss, a co-founder, who had such strong opinions about what needed to be built that were not based in evidence at all. And I discovered human centered design basically as a way to get better data so that I wouldn't have to have that argument over opinions. And I could say, well, here's my evidence that's based in all of this research, and this is what the customers are telling us. Where's your evidence? And that would, if done tactfully, would actually transform their way of thinking. And now, of course, executives do not like their opinions to be challenged, and has to be done very diplomatically. But when you just kind of lay it out at the table and just say, look, this is what our customers are telling us. What are we going to do about that? That sort of gets around that, the defensive argument, and was, again, really incredibly transformative. So then I actually started teaching other CTOs as a CTO coach
Right.
to do the same thing. And that's where this sort of all evolved from. And then I moved over into executive coaching, working with the CEOs. And now I coach them to have the same mindset so that they're actually seeking this out.
Uh-huh.
Right. So I get them to kind of get out of their own head and even challenge their own intuition or their own confidence to say, yeah, but what evidence do we have to support these assumptions and these beliefs? And let's go see what the customers think and what the customers care about. And once that light bulb goes off, and you get them to believe it, if you have that mindset shift, it is insanely powerful. And obviously, because that's usually the point at which I make an introduction to you. That is, hey, you want that? Yeah, you do. Okay, here's the guy who's going to come give it to you.
Well, and one of the beauties about being an agency is that I can champion the truth without fear.
Mm,
So one of the things I've seen that is kind of unfortunate is when researchers are embedded within organizations and they work for them, the fear of power differentials and fear of
mm,
losing their job really holds them back from just speaking the truth.
mhm,
And so politics come into play. When you're independent like we are, one of the core values of my agency is integrity, right? And
mhm,
what that means for me is authentically representing the voice of the customer,
mhm,
right? So I tell the truth, whatever that truth is. And if a CEO doesn't like it, oh well, the worst you can do is stop working with me. Um,
mhm,
but there's no political consequence for me in terms of, oh, how is this going to affect my day-to-day living? And that
mhm,
freedom, I think, is also really beneficial for the companies because they know I'm going to tell it how it is.
mhm. Yeah.
But it's never me and my opinion. Like, of
Right.
course, I have my opinions. I've been doing design for a long time. But when I'm going to try to present recommendations as to direction, it's always going to be grounded in the research. And at that point, if they say, well, what do you think? And my answer is very simple. It doesn't matter. What matters is what your users are saying, right? And here's the data. Take it or
Yeah.
leave it, right? It's your company. Hopefully you make the right decisions. And here's some of that, decades of experience in design as to recommendations of how you can improve that experience or other things that you might need to do strategically. But at the end of the day, it's not my responsibility, right? My
Mhm.
responsibility is to execute the research or build the systems that bring these insights to you. It's your responsibility as a leader to act correctly on them. And I like that relationship.
Yeah.
It's
So
good.
this actually reminds me, there was a project that we worked on. I'm gonna keep the company anonymous here, but I'm sure you'll pick up on who I'm
It's
talking
not.
about. You might know already without even saying anything. There was a client of mine, a founder who was very, very opinionated, very visionary, had some really great ideas, very great kind of aesthetic design focus, but was very just very strong in their opinions, and didn't really want to look at or listen to what the data were telling us. And we brought you in, and you came and you did some research, and you brought data, you brought firsthand video clips of the customers actually telling us what they were experiencing, and you said some things that were well, let's just say very bold.
Sure.
And the rest of the team actually talked afterwards and were like, "Holy shit, like nobody has ever spoken to him in that way." And the way that he responded was, was challenging, but you had that integrity. And that actually put the light bulb off for me, realizing, wow, we had a complete yes man culture happening in this company where nobody felt the courage to say what really needed to be said. And you were able to come in and do that, not only with these beautiful highlight reels that were just these cuts of, you know dozens of different customers saying the same thing in the same message, to support, the insights that you were bringing. But then you built this incredible dashboard that measured the customer satisfaction in like a dozen different touch points along the entire experience. And
Mhm.
that was this incredible light bulb of like, wait, we're getting touch points in all these interviews and these surveys and these in-app pop-ups, and all of that data is flowing back into this dashboard where we can see exactly where people are the least satisfied in, from marketing to sales to onboarding to all the different features in the product to billing and customer support and everything. And then we were able to zoom in and say, okay, well, what's going on here? Well, here's all the research and here's all the interviews and all the insights that we've gathered. And it was just mind-blowingly powerful. So I just want to
Yeah.
say that. I don't know, any thoughts or comments on that, or did I
Well,
kind of
yeah.
tell the
So,
whole story?
Eric's telling the story, and you might be thinking in your head that, this is some enterprise level company, but this was accomplished through regular interviews and surveys. And that was it,
Mhm,
right? So we used Typeform for the surveys and we piped the data into Google Dashboards,
mhm,
right? So this is where we measured our closed and structured kind of questions and we did our ratings. And then at the end of the survey, we would invite people to a follow-up interview, right? And if someone said yes to that, then they would schedule a 30-minute interview with Lisa, who works with me, and we had a script which kind of basically followed up on a lot of the points in the survey. And between those two things, we gathered both the quantitative data and the qualitative data to truly gather a holistic understanding of the customer. And this was a startup. This wasn't $100 million company, but
mhm.
it brought in steady feedback. And I will say that the CEO we're talking about, I really thought it was an amazing working relationship because on one hand, while he was strongly opinionated, he was also an avid consumer of this information.
Mm,
The way he was consuming the information before we came along wasn't very efficient, and it was kind of just a story here and there, which isn't the best way. There's
mhm,
no sample size strong enough to make design decisions from an occasional conversation. So the rigor we brought allowed him to look at quantity, like how many people were suffering from this particular usability issue, or how many people preferred this over that. Um, and sometimes he just went his own direction anyway. Other times he really took it to heart. But what I did know and I appreciated was how passionate he was about listening to
mhm,
those voice of customer programs. And that's all you can ask for, right?
mhm.
The company's still around. I think they're doing well. A lot of the recommendations that we made have been implemented, and in other cases, he chose different decisions, and that's his prerogative as a really
Mhm.
creative genius in his own right. Um, but it was, I think, what was really successful was the combination of his vision and willingness to listen, and then bringing all the information to him on a regular cadence.
Yeah, no, I remember the biggest challenge that we had was the speed, right? So that this
Mhm.
was somebody who was making changes to the app almost daily. And you needed some time to go get the research without
Indeed.
invalidating the results because the product was different. And so we really worked hard on how do we get the fastest cadence possible. And I think we got to a point where like we could spin up, if there was an effort, a research effort, or a new feature or a flow, we could spin up something in a couple of weeks and then start getting feedback, on like a weekly basis or something like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, because we built a lot of templates, and we also built some tool infrastructure. So at that company, we used something called Dovetail, which is qualitative software analysis tool that really is great because once you know the kind of projects you want to run, you can set up basically boilerplate templates for all those projects, whether it's testing a concept or a design validation or discovery research or ongoing customer feedback. You can manage it all through there. So once we had the tools in place and the surveys written and stuff like that, you're right. Anytime we needed to do an effort, we could launch it within 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, the challenge was he was still working faster than the time it took to actually analyze that data and make recommendations. So sometimes by the time we had results, he had already thought about it and come up with a new variant of the product.
Mhm.
Um, whether that was good or not, we had to wait and see for the next round. But at the same time, there were some core themes that were persistent across all the different forms of research, and those were the big things, right?
Mhm.
That needed to change in order for the product to succeed, right? And so that was kind of independent of speed, fundamental
Yeah.
UX issues versus small things that you can iterate quickly. It was a complex environment, but like I said, that just goes to show that every situation is unique, and you really have to figure out what's the best situation for the people, the product, their willingness to do things, the resources, and everything that you have at hand.
Yeah, no, it was really masterful work, and seeing that mindset shift from, I have this vision, I just need to get it built, to, being hungry for the research, hungry for the insights, just can't wait to learn, what do people think about this new variant or this new prototype that we've mocked up, was a really amazing transformation. So that's kind of the way I've been positioning it ever since. This was several years ago, that research isn't something that prevents progress. It's something that's happening alongside with whatever you're doing, but ultimately, gets tighter and tighter ingrained into the process, and then ultimately accelerates it, because you don't have to spend your time wondering and deliberating. Well, what should we do? Should we take a step this way or that way? The signal is just pointing you exactly where you need to go. The challenge is how do you stand up that operation alongside of an existing, development pipeline, and do it a way where you can start to influence it, right? And start to, but without being a roadblock. So
Uh-huh.
what are some of your tactics there?
I think there's a couple different approaches. One is there's some research that doesn't need to be like always ongoing, right? So discovery research or a usability test or validation or something like this, these can be project based. And if you don't have your own internal research capacity, the easiest thing to do is just hire someone as a contractor or an agency to do that work for you, especially if it's just a one-off.
Mhm.
Um, if you do have a researcher on your team, then that's great. One of the things that will happen is everybody will turn to that researcher for all research efforts. So depending on the size of the company, that can become really quickly overwhelming. And every solo researcher out there, I feel you. I know what it's like. I've been there. And it's tough because what people don't realize is just how much work they're putting on your shoulders. So my recommendation is where I see a lot of companies going, which is that product managers are responsible for research. So they may be partnering with researchers, but ultimately they own that. So the company needs to give enough space in that PM's life to
Mhm.
say, I'm going to take 10% of my time and I'm going to dedicate it towards whatever research we need to be doing. Um, with one of the companies I've done, they did a really nice division of labor. They have the product managers responsible for discovery research and concept validation, right? Just what are we building? Is it the right thing to build? Those questions, right? And then they have the design team responsible for all evaluative research. So like usability
Mhm.
testing, prototype testing, design validation, Q&A at the end. And that works. And they don't have a researcher at all, right?
Mhm.
So our agency supports them by building the systems in place, and we're doing the training and enablement. And that's another place where an agency can be really valuable, is if you don't want to commit internal resources to having like a research manager and a researcher, which is going to cost you at least a couple $100,000 a year, right?
Mhm.
It's way less expensive to actually hire an agency to handle these things for you. Whether that means just coming in on a project basis or coming in as like an embedded worker. So they are paid by the agency they work for, but they work as an embedded part of your team. Maybe not full
Mhm.
time, but then you don't have to worry about benefits. You don't have to worry about all the other things. They still have that independence. So for that kind of separate integrity and accountability, it's really advantageous. Um, and then, of course, the third level is if you are a company with the resources, you absolutely should have two roles. One is researcher, the other is research operations. And at
Mhm.
first, it could be the first one person that does both. But research
Mhm.
operations is more about leading research and also understanding all the systems building that I've been talking about, how to structure systems, how to make sure things are as efficient as possible so that product development speed increases. The
Mhm.
average researcher doesn't know that. So you can have someone that's an amazing researcher, but they're not good at strategy and operations, right? So if you're really lucky, you can find someone that can do both, right?
Mhm.
You'll pay for that, but it's definitely less expensive again than hiring two separate people. But
Mhm.
from just a what's the best long-term vision in a mature organization, I do think they're best as separate roles.
One of the hardest things that I found is, how do you integrate the research into the product development pipeline, and how do you actually get research to drive product strategy? Those some of the hardest things. Is you've got these researchers that do great work and have these great insights, but they don't have the power necessarily when you're comparing them to, say, sales or marketing or the executives. And so really weaving that in takes a great research team, but also a really great product leader to see the value of it and to just embed it into the way they build products.
Wow.
And this actually creates a paradigm that I'm very passionate about, called discovery led growth. So we've talked about sales led growth, where the sales team or the CEO just comes in and says, I've got a customer on the hook here that said they would buy our product if we build this next feature for them. And then and obviously we know the challenges that come along with that is that you're being tactical instead of strategic. You're not making moves that are in the best long-term interest. It's very short-term focused. And it also doesn't always take into account, really good customer feedback, right? You got a bunch of customers telling you one thing. Well, we don't have time to get to that because we're building this one-off feature so that we can close that next deal. Well, now we're making our existing customers unhappy, and so now we have a churn problem. That's actually one of the first things that I look at when clients come to me with a churn problem, is to say, well, are you focusing your efforts on retention and on keeping your existing customers happy, or are you working on stuff just to close new deals? And of course, there needs to be a balance.
That's really good. I'm going to use that.
Well, there you go. So then came along product-led growth. And the idea here was that, hey, let's show, not tell, right? Let's put less of our efforts on trying to sell or convince people to buy a product and just get them to use it and show them the value with, with demos, with freemium options, with, tiered pricing, whatever it might be. And let the product, sell itself with like a really strong referral program. And that was great and everything. But then it became like kind of a pissing contest between product and sales. So, product was coming in saying product led growth, that's the new thing, that's the new hotness. And then the sales team was saying, well, this is just a power play, right? You're just trying to take control. And so, that it kind of sullied the name a little bit, when in reality, what we were talking about here was really just almost like a product. It was a product decision and a pricing decision, not exactly a sales strategy. But discovery led growth, in my opinion, is an incredible sales strategy, especially in the early stages, where the people who are participating in your research are your first customers and your strongest advocates, right? Because they're engaged with you, they're emotionally invested, you've built the product along with them, for them. And then you ask them all these questions about, well, what will it take for you to buy it? Will you use it? Will you test it? Okay, now you're testing it. Now you're giving us feedback. Can you pay for it? It's just obviously a logical conclusion. So what's your experience with that?
Well, I'll answer that by telling a story.
Yes,
So
please.
last year, I was working with a client that was building new software systems for waste management, call them haulers. And they were, they had built a really amazing product, but it was overly complicated, and they had sold it to a bunch of people, but adoption was really suffering. And so they were aware enough to recognize that they needed to do some discovery. So me and the co-founder got in a car, drove to 5 states, and went and spent a couple days at 8 different haulers. And our objective was go in and just see what a day in the life is like, and talk to these people and understand what their world is. And it was so utterly enlightening, both for me and for the co-founder, because we instantly recognized, well, the product is way too complicated. These people have such incredible workflow inefficiencies that all they want is just to be able to do a few core tasks. They don't need all the bells and whistles that the product had. They just want to be able to do their job. And they had come up with all these workarounds, from Excel sheets to sticky notes everywhere, but when you spoke with them, they were just constantly frustrated by workflow inefficiencies.
Mhm.
And the software tools that they were using were seriously outdated. And so there was a massive, easily proven need for this product. So PMF was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Really, it's just a no-brainer. But what goes into that product, what are the right features to choose, became really the focus of this. So we came back, and with about 150 hours worth of video and audio, needless to say, that took us a good month, to
Mm.
code and analyze and turn it into something that was consumable. But it became very clear what to build, right? And what was really needed for these people. So the product team simplified and said, let's just focus on getting these people going, and we can build more complexity over time as we activate revenue. Um, and guess what? It's a winning strategy, but it was so much fun, right? So, you're in a car together with a co-founder for a week and a half. Who knows how that's going to go, right? But fortunately, we got along great. And in the process of being in that experience, that shift, a tectonic shift in understanding of why we need to do this, right?
Mhm.
And guess what? Everybody that we visited, they are customers now, right?
Yeah.
Because when we went in the field, we formed relationships.
Mhm.
We had enough empathy to say, we're going to come all the way to you, and we're going to spend an entire day with you and just listen to you complain about everything that frustrates you, right? And we're not even going to talk about our product. That was a rule. We had a jar. If you mention the product once, you throw $1 in the jar,
I
right?
love it.
Not allowed to talk about your own company, right? It was all just listening. Human beings are hardly ever listened to. I mean, think about it. If you're listening to this podcast, how often have you been asked what frustrates you in your daily life and how it could be made better? Like never or once, maybe.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when someone genuinely, authentically listens and asks and has empathy, people open up and they share their world. And that data is absolutely invaluable. But then the bonus on top of that is you've now cultivated a relationship. And if you come back to them and say, hey, we built something, we would like to test this concept with you, they're the first people that are going to say yes. So you don't have to worry about
Mhm.
recruitment. And then when you actually build it and you have the MVP and you go, oh, we really want to pilot this with you, they're the first people to say yes. And then when the pilot goes well, they go, can we buy this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Done. Sales is taken care of, all from just good discovery.
And so think about, especially for the early stage founders that are on their way to product market fit. There's no better way to not only get your first sale and to show some really good traction, but also to by creating that relationship, to get the best testimonials and customer feedback you could possibly ask for, because these are people who really care about you and care about your success, because now they have a vested interest
For
in your
sure.
product. So not only are they willing to pay for you, they're going to help you raise money. So discovery-led growth is the new hotness now. Forget about sales, forget about product. This is how you gain traction. This is how you build relationships, and this is an ongoing system, right? This never ends at any level of scale. As you're going and engaging with customers, whether they're new potential customers or whether they're existing customers, this is a sales strategy and it's a retention strategy,
I
and it's been fantastic. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the accelerator program that we've been working on together, and that you've generously given your time to help support the cohort of SaaS founders that have joined us. So I came to you several months ago with a pretty tall ask, which was take your 10-week masterclass in product design and cram it into 3 short sessions, or maybe not short, but short workshops. And that was obviously, I'm sure, really painful for you, but it's been incredible. And the content we created was incredible, and the feedback and the results for the founders has been incredible. So tell me a little bit about your the journey and really the kind of the essential pieces that we helped our founders with.
Well, when you first came to me with the challenge, I have to say my gut reaction was, this is impossible. Because it's hard enough to teach all this stuff in a 10-week masterclass. And I know because I do this all the time. But I'm really glad that you did, because what it forced me to do was say, what is the most essential information of all this stuff that people need to be exposed to so that they can then understand what they need to do for their own ideas. And so essentially what we ended up doing was we ended up stripping out a lot of the complicated how-to and really focused on like the why for each piece, the
Mhm.
what comes out of that, and here's an exercise or 2 or 3 or 4, right?
Mhm.
That gets you started doing these motions. And then they had a month, basically to go out and practice that piece, right? And then they would come back and we work on the next one, and we checked in with them halfway each time. And to me, I think the most important outcome for the people that took part in the accelerator course is understanding what you're capable of and what you're not.
Mhm.
Like, one, recognizing, wow, to actually go from concept to prototype is complicated and it has a whole lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
I need to continuously validate both the problem and the solution, right? And I could do some of these things, but also maybe it's better if someone else does some of these things. So I think it helps
Yeah.
from that organizational leadership perspective of understanding what you can own and what you need to delegate.
Mhm. Mhm.
It also was really eye-opening to saying this is what human-centered design actually looks like.
Mhm.
And I think that it was a small miracle that we we did it in just 3 sessions. Um,
Yeah.
but it was fantastic to do so, and I think it's a great dip your foot in the water program
Yeah.
for anybody. So, I would recommend, I think you have this publicly available on LinkedIn. Anybody can go back and,
Yeah.
and go through these and practice this as exercises on your own and really get a sense of where you are and what you need.
Yeah. No, well, it was obviously an incredible way to kind of launch the cohort. And my mindset around this and why I wanted to really cram it into 3 sessions was I wanted to force people to kind of connect the dots end to end to really just get a taste of what this whole thing looks like. And then
Mhm.
obviously it's a continuous process of going back and iterating and refining and so on. But yeah, we covered a lot of material, a lot of ground. But the things that I found to be most insightful, we had some really early stage founders who were doing this for the first time, right? Building their MVP. And this was obviously just a launch pad to get them some validation to have a real tangible product within just a few short months. But we also have plenty of founders who already have a product in market and these light bulbs were going off around, oh my gosh, like this is why things haven't been working because we've missed so many so much context. There's so many things that we don't know about our customers or about the problem that we're trying to solve. There's so many things that we haven't validated around how well this solution meets the demands or meets the customer needs. So whether they were people building for the first time or people who have been in market for many years, there was always at least one big aha moment where they actually went and they had the conversations or they went through the exercises and the challenges and found some fundamental unlock, right? Some fundamental thing that was sticking or holding them back, creating friction that they were able to unlock and get to that next level, which is, better, yeah, building the right thing, right? A better performing product, and even speed of delivery, right? So
Mhm.
obviously this is an accelerator program, so it's all about speed, but it's about speed of getting to product market fit, not just speed of building something because anybody can build anything, but about building the right thing and actually getting the confidence and clarity that you have built the right thing. And then once you have that, and I've experienced this myself, and every single founder that I've ever worked with has experienced this, there's always a ton of work to do. And when you know you're building the right thing and you're building the right thing the right way, there's this almost infinite wellspring of energy to work hard and to keep pushing forward. And it's inspiring and motivating in and of itself because you know you're on the right path. But where most founders get burned out is when they don't know. They're doing a bunch of work and it doesn't work, and they build something else and it doesn't work, and they've got to scratch it and they've got to pivot and they've got to switch to a different persona or a different problem or a different solution or a different feature. And not having that positive feedback loop is what creates burnout. And what we're able to do in these few short workshops is to create that signal, that beacon of hope that like you are on the right track. Holy crap. And then everybody just had rocket fuel in their engine. So it's been incredible. Now, in terms of where to find that, it's not publicly available anymore. You just got to come reach out to me, and I'll be happy to share the link with you. But so anybody who's listening or watching, I'd say probably the easiest thing to do if you go to the website is pmfscorecard.com, is a website that I stood up to offer a framework around product market fit that has some emails that link to these various workshops and things like that. You can also obviously just email me, eric@fullcycleproduct.com. And I will be happy to send you the replays of the workshops, all the templates and tools and everything that we did. and also obviously talk to you about whether or not the accelerator is a good fit for you, because this was the first series, if you will, of the accelerator. But now we're moving on to other challenges around product market fit, like strategy and messaging and fundraising and leadership and hiring and et cetera, et cetera. But this was really the foundation of, again, before we do anything else, let's make sure that we understand our customers, we understand the problem that we're solving, and we understand how to build a solution that meets those needs. So again, thank you obviously so much for your support there. So if somebody wanted to come and talk to you, where can they find you?
Okay. Well, thank you for asking. And it's really, it's really significant for me that that program had the impact that you're talking about. It's great to hear that success stories, because that's all you hope for. At the end of the
Mhm,
day, we're just trying to help people succeed.
mhm,
And we have our focus areas, but that's what we do. We are enabling in the way that we help companies understand their people and build their products. And to learn more about us, you can visit www.insightsdesign.co. So that's insights plural, design, and then .co, not .com. That's our
mhm.
website. You can also get in touch with Eric or myself
Yeah.
through Slack or through LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to sit down and talk with you to understand your needs and see if we are a good fit.
Well, yeah, again, I really appreciate, your support with the accelerator, your support with, all the different clients that we've worked on together. I always kind of say, it's my job to kind of evangelize and do the mindset shift around human-centered design. And then once they're hooked, they say, okay, give it to me. Where do I get it? And I say, well, go talk to Bryan. And it's always been, it's always delivered. It's always been incredible. And I know that you're one of the best kind of levers for growth that I can offer to my clients, and so I'm always happy to showcase you.
Well, I
Any
appreciate it.
final thoughts or anything? Yeah.
Well, just, I don't know, maybe it's a weird thing about me, but I love building systems. That's something I really, really
Mhm.
enjoy, and it's complicated. But
Yeah.
that level of complexity is actually what gives me that purpose, right? You talked about
Mhm.
founders having confidence, and that confidence galvanizes energy. Well, I get
Mhm.
the same thing from complex challenges, right? So
Yeah.
bring me your challenge. I'll be happy to dig in, and maybe I have the solution. Maybe I need to refer you to someone else that has a better solution than me. At the end of the day, it's about your success. So, Eric, thank you so much for having me. Happy to help out in the future again.
Awesome. I'll call on you. All right. Thanks so much, man. Have a great day.